only way off of this place. Variant Big Mike, do you think we're gonna die? Well, as for me, the variant Big Mike, I'm the main character. I don't think I'm going to die at all. I think I'll be saved just in the nick of time. But as for you, I'd say it's a pretty safe bet that you're probably going to die. Oh, dear Lord, not again! Will you please stop hitting me? Welcome to Big Mike's Real Reviews. I am Big Mike, and today I'm covering the 4th episode of the Loki series on Disney Plus entitled The Nexus Event. So, I have a lot to say about this episode right now. I will say this is my favorite episode so far. Wow. This whole episode just kind of left me like... And so, I'm just going to give my review. I think I'm going to give it a 9.5. I'm going to give it a 9.5. Because like I said, it's my favorite episode so far. There's so much to unpack. So I'm just going to drop the spoiler warning. That's what I thought about it. It was my favorite so far. 9.5. Now we got to talk about this. We got to unpack this thing. Okay? So, of course, like every other episode, starts out where the other one left off. They're on Lamentus. They don't know if they're going to live or die. They're pretty much accepting their fate at this point, being Loki and Sylvie. And so there was a Nexus event caused. Now, you know what? Here's another thing that kind of like, this is the only thing that really bugged me about this episode. Really bugged me. So we see from episode at the end of episode 2 where Sylvie drops all the bombs and like causes all these events in the timeline. Then all of a sudden the timeline's just kind of like, oh, it's just fine again. I'm like, wait a minute. How is the timeline just fine again? Like after all those branches started sprouting up, right? And then all of a sudden, like they're all just fine again. We have one sacred timeline. And because when they're looking for Loki and Sylvie, they can't find them, of course, because that's why she ended up hiding out on, different apocalyptic events. But when they started to get close, like she touched Loki's arm and they were holding hands and, then the spike came up on the sacred timeline and it's like, oh, there they are. And they, went and got them from there, which whatever reason caused a Nexus event, in which we find out, a little later that there's a little chemistry going on between the two of them, which makes sense of a Loki to be like so narcissistic that he can only, basically fall in love with himself. Anyway, so I had a couple of friends that maybe suggested that it might go this route. And at first I was just kind of like, I didn't really see it. I was just like, okay, they have like common interest in the same person and, whatever. But like this episode kind of just like cemented that idea where it's like, yeah. And then when you think about it, it's like, yeah, it kind of makes total sense. I mean, it is Loki. He is the god of mischief and chaos. So it's like, he is a narcissist. So he's never been able to like really, truly love somebody or whatever. So it does kind of make sense that he's like, you know what? I fell for myself. So I guess in that aspect it makes sense, and maybe that's the thing that caused that little Nexus event spike that allowed the TVA to eventually find them and bring them back. So this is where things get interesting. We find out that Sylvie was basically plucked from her timeline as a child, and she has no idea what her Nexus event was. Because, and at the time, Renslayer was just, one of the Minutemen who picked her up. And she escaped. She took her tent pad. And that's how Sylvie escaped. She took the tent pad from Renslayer and escaped that way. So we find out as well that C20, now the TVA at this point, we figure out they lie as much as Loki does. Okay, so C20, they tell Mobius, just went downhill after she came back, and she just died because she actually remembered she had a life before the TVA, that she was a variant, and she's actually like telling this whole story. Renslayer tells Mobius, hey, she went downhill and she died. And Mobius is like, what? So we, like I said, it's a lot of this episode. Anyway, so we get there, and so of course that is a lie. And B15, we know, was also enchanted by Sylvie, and she starts to, remember things as well. So when they get brought in, you can kind of see that B15 is a little, shaken as well. She ends up taking Sylvie back to like the Rocks cart place. And it's like, what did you do to me? And I could have swore like I had this life or whatever. And she was like, show me. So Sylvie enchants her, shows her old life, and kind of made an ally in the process, because the whole point of that was like, we're starting to really understand what the TVA is, that they're liars, and this is just built on whoever, someone like some puppet master, okay, is pulling the strings, which we're supposed to think is the timekeepers, which we're going to get to the point where that's pretty much not the case either. So we get there, and Mobius puts Loki in this time loop where he cut off Sif's hair. She was mad. She hits him. She beats him up. She kicks him in the nuts. And it was just this time loop over and over again of that, right? So Mobius is starting to question too, because Loki did tell Mobius before he put him in the time loop that the TVA is lying to you, basically. And Mobius, of course, didn't believe it at first. So when he's in Renslayer's office, like they like to, sit in there and have drinks, he switches temp pads with Renslayer. When he opens up her temp pad, when he, goes off to himself, he sees the C20 interview and what she's saying, and how, she's like, we're all variants. I had a life before this. And he sees Renslayer like kind of cut the tape. So he's like, oh man, yeah, I see what's going on. So he goes to Loki and he's like, look, I need you to trust me. He was like, hey, something's off. You were right the whole time. And so they're like, okay, we have a plan. We're going to go back. So when they go back, Renslayer's waiting. And she was like, you have something in mind. He's like, oh yeah, I picked it up by mistake type thing. He gave it back. And then like she's there with a few Minutemen, and she's like, prune him. Because at this point, he realizes, hey, yeah, like I had a life before this. And, maybe you asked me before where I'd want to go in the timeline. And he's like, maybe a jet ski, that's probably what it was, my life before. And she said to prune Mobius, and he was. And that was like, whoa, I was like, what is going on? What is going on? Because I, like everyone else, I wanted this series to end with like Mobius riding his jet ski, back in the 90s. So it's like, whoa, what just happened? So they're like, the timekeepers want to oversee your pruning and, personally and all this stuff. So they take them to the timekeepers, and we see the timekeepers, and I'm like, okay, I still think this is like, we're going to get this Wizard of Oz moment. And of course we do get this Wizard of Oz moment where Loki and Sylvie are there with the timekeepers. The timekeepers are kind of like, berating them and telling them they're nothing and blah, blah, blah. And so we have this big fight, and and the ally, like I said, was B15. Because at the last moment, she comes in and she releases the collars off of Sylvie and Loki, and they're able to fight the Minutemen, and they end up getting to the timekeepers. Sylvie takes her sword and she cuts off one of their heads, and of course, robots. So we still don't know at this point who's pulling the strings here for the TVA, right? So after that, we get the moment between Loki and Sylvie where Loki's trying to like say, he's basically trying to say, look, I think he was going to say like, hey, I'm not good at this. I think I love you, or, we've had something like back on Lamentus, and then all of a sudden Loki just gets pruned. And another mind-blowing situation. What is going on? And it was Renslayer. You thought she was knocked out, and it wasn't. And then Sylvie like puts her down, and Renslayer's like, do it, kill me. And she's like, no, you're going to tell me everything. Cut to credits. I was like, you cannot leave me like this for a week. What is going on, right? Fortunately, now, I have been doing this. I have been kind of fast forwarding, right? And making sure there's no post-credit scenes. Because, you know, in the shows, the post-credit scenes are hit or miss. You're going to get a post-credit scene, most likely in the last episode, you know, or maybe one or two here and there, right? So I was just trying to sit there and process, you know, after everything I've seen. I was sitting there processing, and I'm like, oh, I just got to sit here. Like, I didn't even fast forward through. And so we get to, after the initial, you know, credit scene, we get a post-credit scene or a mid-credit scene. And I was like, oh, finally, because Loki's laying there and he's like, am I dead? Is this hell? And then you hear a voice saying, no, you're not dead, but you will be if you don't come with us. And we see an old man Loki, kid Loki, and I don't know if the black Loki was actually Loki, but he was holding a hammer. Maybe he was like a black Thor from another timeline. I don't know who that guy was, but he was some big black dude with a hammer. And I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but I need to see the next episode to see, like, first of all, where I'm assuming everyone who gets pruned goes here. So I'm like, whew, hopefully Mobius is here somewhere. Let's find him, right? And then everyone else who has been pruned. Now, it looked like that, like, apocalyptic New York from the trailer. Now, it looks like that's where everyone gets sent, and I don't know why everyone gets sent there once they're pruned, but we'll find out in the next episode. But that was a very, like, calming effect after everything that happened in that episode, because I'm like, this show is called Loki. You just killed him all. I was like, what is going to happen at this point? So I'm glad they at least gave us that little reveal so we didn't have to wait until next week for that. Because I think they knew better than do that, because people would have lost their minds, literally, if they just left it without that little, you know, mid-credit scene. And yeah, like I said, this was my favorite episode so far. I'm enjoying this show way more than I thought I would. Please let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Please hit that bell for notifications so you will be notified of all my latest content. And once again, thanks for watching and see you next time.